in Brussels to organize this meetup. We have a nice audience. So the day will be, or the evening will be divided in 2-3 parts. The first part will be by Philippe, who is the boss of Iser or Iser, whatever. He will explain the project, and he hosts us for free tonight. Second big announcement and event is that David has his anniversary today. So thank you to David, and has got some chocolate for him. And you can get his age in blocks. I suppose it's Bitcoin blockchain blocks. Okay, so you can read it on the paper. That's for the fun part. Then we will have a part where we will buy pizza with Bitcoins. And the Bitcoins will be converted, if I'm right, Jeremy and Arne, from Monero?
Monero would be converted.
Monero to Bitcoin, Bitcoin, pizza, and a few minutes later we should get the pizza. It's all paid by XMR.TO, but they will explain it. And then we have Justin, is there, who will speak more about Monero.
I will speak.
You will speak. You will speak, and then he will make an additional speak to it.
When do we order? Start with first? Or?
We will first have the introduction by Philippe. Thank you, and please join me in thanking Philippe.
Well, I'm pleased to see such a big crowd again. We've made a little movie. I don't know if you can start it. It will, so that you don't have to walk around the whole building and have a quick view. It does not work. No. So welcome here at Digitizer. Why is it called Digitizer? Well, we are very close to metro station Iser, and we are all about digitalization of Brussels. So we received the mission to facilitate the digitalization of Brussels through mainly 3 technologies. One technology is about artificial intelligence, the other one is about virtual reality, and the third one is IoT. So basically, this is what we are doing. Next to that, we received a building if we could also help entrepreneurship in Brussels. So one of our co-founders gave us this beautiful building. So we are going to put an accelerator. So if you have accelerating programs in your head or ways to make companies grow faster and things like that, this is the place where you can do it. And then we have a third mission, which is more social. We want to help people from the neighborhood here to be digitalized and to follow classes in IT, to follow classes in mathematics, statistics, and things like that. Because we're quite nerdy. The crowd is quite nerdy here, so we will give free mathematics and statistic courses to the youth from the region, and we will also invite them to, and these are the youngsters from 17 to 22, to do their blockers here when they have exams. I mean, it's easier to study here than at the kitchen table with 7 other brothers and 22 sisters. So this is what we are. I think I can't really explain it much shorter than that. Important for you to remember is that this is a place where communities are welcome. This is a place driven by communities. It's a data science community together with the virtual reality community and the IoT community who initiated the project. And we are eager to host you as well. So we want to be your home. We had, as a data science community, which now we have 3,000 members, we had always this challenge that we had to prostitute ourselves to find a space to hold a meetup, or if you want to have food, we had to buy the gas at the entrance that would allow the food to come in and things like that. So here, it's a place where, as a community, as you know that there is a space available, there are no guards at the entrance, and there's no, it's easier to organize things. We can organize events up to 200 people here downstairs, and we can and we have this beautiful rooftop terrace at the top where we can host another 100, 150 people there. So this could be, if you want it, to be your host. So what are we looking for today? We are looking for drivers with the project. If you have a specific project, be it on the social side, saying, oh, I want to do an IoT Fab Lab, or repair shop for this, great, you're welcome. Or people or trainers, people say, oh, I'm the king of Python and I want to explain what's in the new notebook and I want to train. You are welcome. If you want to make money with that, that's fine, because we are all supporting entrepreneurship as well. So the idea is, if you use our building, we do share revenue. So if you make some money, then we share a part of what you make, a very small part. And if you don't make some money, then you don't have any risk and you won't have any cost. So that's the whole idea. So I wish you all the best for the meetup tonight. If you have more questions, if you want to look around, we have some interesting startup pods at the top. We also have flex desk. We have training rooms up from 10 to 30 people that is available to you. So whenever you're interested in, come to me, go to Tanguy, who is there, who can answer all the questions. Or if you want to meet some people who are already here, you can ask Hassan, or you can, you know. So have a nice evening and enjoy yourself. See you later.
What's that? Oh. Yeah? Ah, okay. So it works? I have no idea if it works. Do we have a microphone? I think you can all hear me, right? Just a few words, maybe, to present the group. The blockchain Brussels meetup is now more than 4 years old, and we're still having meetup. I think this event is the number 47 since the very beginning. So sometimes we have things that are reasonably organized, like tonight with presentations on various topics, cryptocurrency, blockchains, etc. Sometimes we just meet in a restaurant. Lately, there's a lot of interest since maybe 2-3 months. We see a lot of new people coming in, so it's really great. You still see also the old-timers that stick around. It's really great. It's all organized by voluntary people like me and a few others. So thanks to Jean in particular for tonight. Thanks to Philippe for the place. That's great. Thank you. So one thing I can ask you is to come back if you like it, and to leave a comment on the meetup website if you like the event on the group. So tonight we focus on Monero. I'm super pleased to host Justin. Before this, as promised, and I know you're all around for the pizza, we will order some pizza via XMR.TO. So, Arne, are we reasonably ready?
Well, I think you need to switch the input. Will do.
So you will hear a lot more tonight about Monero. So just very briefly, Monero is awesome.
Especially because we can't eat pizza.
Among other things, for the privacy that it gives to whoever is using it to purchase something. The drawback of Monero so far is that there are not many merchants in the world that accept it yet. It's getting better, but there are many more merchants that actually accept Bitcoin. And in particular, the website pizza.be or takeaway.com in Belgium accepts Bitcoin for food delivery. So they do the interface between between us and restaurants, basically. So they accept Bitcoin, and we don't have Bitcoins, at least tonight. We have Monero, and we want to spend some Monero. So in order to do that, there's a nice service that was created by Arne and I and another friend that is called XMR.TO, because it allows you to send XMR to whatever you want. XMR is the sign for Monero. So what we will do is to order some pizza, and at the time of actually paying for it, we will send Monero to XMR.TO that will send in return some Bitcoin to pizza.be, who hopefully will bring some pizza. So we'll see.
I have no idea where we are.
That's 40 Boulevard d'Anvers.
C'est lui, Bruxelles? Okay.
Want to put your my phone number, maybe?
Yes.
Lacoste is fine, but it's okay. 488 822 816. All right, and I guess as soon as possible is fine. Okay. Did you choose the pizza?
Yes.
That's efficient.
You want newsletters, right?
No. Okay, so that's BitPay. That's yet another intermediary in that story. But basically, Pizza.be, when they accept Bitcoin, they prefer to receive euros on their bank account, and BitPay is doing that. They will take Bitcoin from us or from XMR.TO, and they will send euros to Pizza.be because Pizza.be most likely doesn't want to bear the risk of Bitcoin volatility. And so Arne is just filling the Bitcoin address where we have to send the Bitcoin. We have to send specifically this amount, 0.0944, so it's about 200 euros, which is in Monero 5.73. And here is the information that we need to send the Monero to XMR.TO. So this is an integrated address. I will not enter into details. Justin might explain this later. But that's basically the destination where we have to send them. And this is the amount that we have to send. So this is mymonero.com, which is an online Monero wallet, where we currently have about 20 Moneros. That's 5.73. Nice try. And we send the payment.
That's it, right?
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so that was sent. And so now it should update. Okay, that's it. Your Bitcoins have been sent. So that was fast. And why was it so fast? It's because the website XMR.TO is serving everything without any confirmation up to 0.1 Bitcoin. So we were close to the limit, but slightly below. So whenever you use the website to order something online that is less than about 200 euros, the Bitcoins are sent immediately. If it's above that, we would have to wait for one Monero confirmation, which is 2 minutes on average. So it's still not that long. But right now it was instant. And now the next guys, BitPay, are happy. And we can return to takeaway.com. And now pizza.be should be happy, and they should bring us pizza. Yes. Okay. So I guess you can thank us when the pizza arrives. Okay, thanks, Arne. Next, I will give a very, very short talk about the policy that Monero is using for people to contribute code. And it's mostly a tribute to a guy that was very influential to define this, that was living in Brussels. And I thought it was a good time to mention it. That will be short, and then the stage will be yours, Justin. I don't know if that was.
Yeah, sure.
I never used that port.
I cannot change class reactions.
No, I can't.
I mean, you can't.
Probably messed up something. What's going on?
We closed all chats.
I'll cover why you may want to go through the extra step of using Monero to convert to Bitcoin to pay a Bitcoin address instead of just using Bitcoin right now, because I can see why many of you might be thinking,
Okay, we're getting there. Yes, we're getting there. No. Wait. Yes. Okay. So, briefly you mentioned about what is called the collective code construction contract, which is sort of contract for a community to work on a project together in terms of how to contribute code. Next one. So, I'm sorry, Roland, I didn't tell you you would be in the slides. So that picture was taken in Brussels a bit more than 2 years ago, in May 2015, after a Monero meetup, because we had one. And that was hosted by this guy, Peter Engens, who since passed away. And while I'm on the topic, that's David Latapi, who was in the Monero core team for quite some time, who also passed away. So it's a sort of tribute to both of them. And then you have a bunch of drunk guys. That's me and Ricardo, Fluffy Pony, and Roland. And the two guys were some friends of Peter that were playing African music during the evening. So it was really an amazing meetup, a good party. But the point of showing this picture is to talk about some legacy that Peter Engens left on Monero. Peter was someone that was very inspirational for many people, I believe. He was a software developer, but he was also an activist, sort of politician. I guess you wouldn't have liked the term, but he has been the president of the Foundation for Free Information Infrastructure, and he was fighting software patents at every level up to the European Parliament. He wrote many books on technology, community building, and in general societal issues, and he's well known to be the founder and the lead maintainer of ZeroMQ, which if you are a developer you might have heard of. And as such, he's also the author of C4, which I will talk about next. So just a few words on ZeroMQ. It's a high-performance asynchronous messaging library. It's developed by a large community of contributors, very large, because a lot of also big institutions are using it professionally. So you have like people from the open source world, but also corporate world, etc. And it relies on the so-called C4, which is inspired by the Wikipedia process and the GitHub fork and pull request model. And C4 stands for Collective Code Construction Contract. And funnily, ZeroMQ is going to be integrated in Monero anytime soon. There is a guy working on a branch that is about to emerge. Next. So this community contract governs how the code is shared together and how the project evolves over time. So the C4 provides a standard process for contributing, evaluating, and discussing improvements on software projects. And this is not a small topic. If you look at Bitcoin, for instance, it's a huge, terrible shit show because somehow the community doesn't get together to actively evolve the project. So the goals of the C4 is to reduce the friction for new contributors so that it's easier for anyone to join the project and start contributing, to promote positive feedback, even on people that are relatively new, to increase the pool of competence in any domain, that is to remove anyone to be a single point of failure or a single point of expertise, to increase the diversity of the decision-making process, so to make something a little bit more organic, which very often is more effective, to allow safe experimentation and rapid failure. It's fine to fail, but you want to do it fast. To reduce the internal complexity of the project, so again, so that it's easier for anyone to start being familiar with the code base and actually contribute. And increase the economic incentive for contributors and reduce the risk to be hijacked by hostile entities, which is a really big deal when you develop software that is meant to do something censorship resistant, such as Monero or other cryptocurrencies. Next. So very briefly, the principles is that you merge everything that is not obviously malicious and which does not break the compilation and the few automated tests that you have. But you are not making any value judgment whether to merge something or not. So nobody is going to say, this is not good enough, I believe we should not do that, so let's not merge it. So you don't put people in a position of power to decide what should be merged or not. It's always merged, and then the value judgment, whether it should be kept in the software or not, is expressed by potentially making a new change request that removes the first one. But then at least it's part of the Git history. So it's not discussions that happen completely offline, so you keep track of what's going on. And the effect is that, so as I said, everything is merged, and that removes completely the endless discussion that very often happens before actually doing anything. There is a sort of over-analysis, paralysis in many projects. So if you look at the BIP, the Bitcoin Improvement Proposal standard in Bitcoin, you can manage to introduce something new to Bitcoin, but it's such a pain that nobody new to the project can do it. Nobody feels they're just afraid to be ashamed by the existing community. It's just too painful. And here it's very easy for anyone to contribute. It's also very hard for a malicious entity to drain the time of the maintainers by launching endless discussions or to stale the software evolution. Again, think of Bitcoin. And every mistakes are part of the software history forever because everything is merged. So you have auditability of who was done by who instead of these discussions happening on forums, offline, etc. Next. So I asked Ricardo how it is going in his opinion, because he's the lead maintainer of Monero. And that has been now about 2 years since Monero is using this sort of contract. So he said, for him, as the lead maintainer in particular, he says, I only merge things that have been reviewed, although occasionally on some of the pull requests, I'm the only reviewer. It's made my job 1,000,000 times easier. Because before that, it would be very easy for someone to drain his time and make him spend hours and hours with every single malicious pull request. But most important, for the community, we have created an environment where the most juniors of developers who don't even know how Git works are able to become official Monero contributors. We have enabled a broad base of reviewers and mentors, and ultimately, I think, led to much better quality code than if we had been really hardcore and locked people out. I didn't have the time to include the last slide, which is the graph of the monthly contributors to the Monero project, but the trend is really, really encouraging. So it does work. The community is actually really growing over time. And there is really a very nice spirit in the Monero development community. It's very accessible. Everyone is quite humble, etc., which is something that may be difficult to find in other projects. So to give you an idea, in the last 2 months, I think, in terms of active contributors, Monero became more active than Bitcoin itself, which is quite a big deal because the ecosystem is still quite smaller. So it does work, and that's all thanks to Peter Ingens, who was hosting us 2 years ago and advising Ricardo and I at the end of this nice evening that you saw the picture to actually use this model. And we discussed this for some good part of the night. And so that's his legacy. Thank you. Now, Justin, the stage is all yours. Justin is really the sort of guy that I like because he, I don't know him yet, but he's really passionate and he's giving a lot of time and a lot of efforts to promote what he likes. Monero. I don't know for the other stuff that you like, but Justin is going to many meetups all over Europe, at least, maybe beyond, to explain what is Monero and answer questions, etc. So I'm really glad that he made a stop in Brussels tonight. Thanks.
And then, do you want me to talk into this mic, or? Okay. So, I normally walk around a lot, so I'll be a little more restricted today than normal, but that's okay. I'm good, right?
Yeah.
Spot-wise? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming out. I have a great turnout today. Again, thanks for thank you for Digitizer for hosting the space today, and also thank you for the blockchain meetup group for helping organize the event too. So I'm going to talk today about Monero, and I am going to make a general assumption that people here are familiar with Bitcoin, with how I discuss the technology. But if you're not familiar with Bitcoin, you can still learn, you can still get some stuff out of it too. So when Bitcoin was first launched, the reason, in my opinion, that it really took off and people took any interest in it at all is because it was the first time that you were able to trust a decentralized network where you didn't trust a single member in that network with your money. It wasn't because it offered low transaction fees or anything. We see now that fees are pretty high, but it was just that we have this large, decentralized, censorship-resistant network that people can use throughout the entire world. And I think that's the main reason why Bitcoin took off. But as people started using Bitcoin, they realized that Bitcoin lacked two important features that money has, and that's privacy and fungibility. For privacy, you might not think, okay, I'm not really a drug lord, why do I care about my privacy, right? But with Bitcoin, everyone in the world knows how much money is in your Bitcoin address. So if we bought pizza, for instance, the person BitPay knows how much money would be in your Bitcoin address if you bought something from BitPay. And let's say you were giving money to your neighbor, well, now your neighbor knows how much money you have. And a lot of people kind of don't talk about this because they're usually just unaware that this is the case when it's actually happening. And even if you're an outside observer and don't communicate with the person, you're not sending and receiving money with this from one account, you can still trace the history of how all of the money is spent on the Bitcoin blockchain and most blockchains. You have a sender that sent a specific amount of money to another account. And yes, they're pseudonymous, they're just strings of numbers and letters, but these can be connected to real-world identities by exchanges who know information about you. It can be connected and also based off who you transact with, the people you receive or send money to or from. And so privacy is important from that perspective. Even if you don't think you need it, especially to hide what purchases you're making, it's still important to have a basic level of privacy for your transactions, especially those that you're already familiar with cash. And then second is fungibility. This is a crazy term. You don't need to remember it or anything. But it's just the concept of money where if I exchange 20 euros with another person's 20 euros, assuming that they're both legally issued, so not someone else printing something or something, that in that case, no one would lose out in the transaction because they could both be used equally. And that sounds reasonable to everyone because you don't want to have to check the history of how money was spent in order to determine whether you should accept or not based off whether it was previously used for something. But with Bitcoin, since you can check how people previously used it, people might not accept certain Bitcoin. So, for instance, in the news a couple months ago was the WannaCry ransomware attack that took off several National Health Service computers in the UK and also, I suppose, also throughout the entire world. But you can see on the blockchain a certain amount of Bitcoin that was paid to the people who ran this attack. If you were talking to someone that wanted to give you WannaCry money, would you accept it? Probably not. But if you're making a transaction where you're buying ice cream and someone gives you a 20-euro note, you don't really have to think about that, right? You have to think about where the money was previously used. And that's something that Monero brings back, and why privacy is necessary in cryptocurrency in order to maintain this crazy word, fungibility, as a property of money. It takes privacy and fungibility and re-implements it back into the digital system. So, after that introduction, I'll talk about myself for a second. Let's see. Okay, so it should work for now. Okay, so my name is Justin Ehrenhofer. I just finished my second year of college. I'm studying finance and management information systems. I am a student at the University of Minnesota. At the University of Minnesota, I also am the co-president of my school's cryptocurrency club there, where I'll talk about everything, including Monero, but also a ton of other stuff. And I just finished my study abroad experience for the semester at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. So I'm traveling around for about another month before heading back to the United States in early August. So that's about me online. If you've been following Monero, you may recognize me as Samsung Galaxy Player. No, I'm not sponsored by Samsung. Don't even have a Samsung. But when I was making the account at the time, I was really lazy and just made it based off the phone I had at the time. So kind of stuck with that now. But my role recently, over the past 5 months, has been to go around talking about what Monero is with a lot of people at these local meetups. And I have been involved in the project for over 2 years, though I am not a primary developer of the project at all. I have some merge commits, so we're talking about the open accessibility. I definitely fall into the noob section that you want to have contribute, but still not touch any of the cryptography. That's me. Because I'll make some changes to the website and maybe comment on GitHub and such, but I don't know any Git commands at all. So that's my developer experience. So when people realized that Bitcoin wasn't private, they said, okay, we already have this excellent system that's decentralized. Why don't we try and add something on top of it so that the people who do care can still have privacy if they want it? And they did this through a Bitcoin mixing or coin join approach. Several people, as you can see there with the different colors, send their Bitcoin to a centralized service called a mixer. They mix up whose funds are whose, and then each person ends up with a fraction of all the funds, as you can see on the right-hand side there. And ideally, if someone would do this, you can no longer trace how the money was previously used because it's all mixed up now. But there are really 3 fundamental issues with this type of approach. So first, since you need to pay extra money to use such a service, and you need to opt in to use it, no one really uses it. So it has very low acceptance. And the only people who do use it are people that need to. If you just mined Bitcoin, if you have brand new, untouched Bitcoin, you're not going to use a mixer, right? And so that's a problem because the only people who use it are people that really need to because they're trying to avoid surveillance or something, or they have money that was used as drug money previously, or maybe WannaCry money, for instance. So as you can see there, the majority of users might have tainted funds to begin with. Second, you're trusting that the mixer, the centralized entity, actually deletes the history of how they mix up your funds. They could just keep a copy of how they store the funds, and you wouldn't know. So you might think your money is private, but to them it's not private at all. They know what you're doing from now on. So that's obviously a problem that you need to worry about the mixer, keeping track of how they spend or how you use your money. And then finally, from a practicality point, it takes time to go through this method. You need to wait for the other participants to also mix with, and if you plan to mix multiple times, it just takes a really long time. With certain implementations where they have you mix about 8 times, it could take weeks or up to a month if you're using a large amount of funds to actually mix as they would define as properly, which I don't think is still good enough for the fundamental flaws. So how is Monero different? Because it doesn't use this mixing approach. It uses currently 3 technologies, and it's working on a 4th in order to protect the privacy throughout the entire scope of the transaction. So as you can see here, and I'll go through all of these technologies in detail, it hides the sender among other inputs with ring signatures. An improvement to ring signatures also hides the transaction amount with ring confidential transactions. The one I was talking about in development is under the transaction broadcast there. I'll talk about that later, but that is an I2P router called Kavri, which will hide the transaction broadcast from people who are trying to log it. And then finally, Monero hides the receiver with stealth addresses. So jumping directly into the first one of ring signatures. I want you to imagine, just to start off, the entire money supply of all of the euros in the world in one spot, all of them. And as you know, they're divided into different denominations. You have your 20, 50 euro notes, you have your 2 euro coins. They're all divided into certain values. Monero is basically the same way. You have your whole money supply of all of the Monero, and then you have the like certain amounts of Monero stored in certain outputs, and you can kind of think of these as the equivalents of like the bills that you have, right? So let's say the red one here that I've highlighted is one that you have. It's one you control. It would show up in your wallet balance. It's as if you had money in your physical wallet, the euros in your physical wallet. Monero hides that this is the money that's actually being spent in the transaction by taking some of the other inputs and making it appear as if all of them are being spent simultaneously. So you can see that I've highlighted 5 in blue here. Those are ones that your wallet software might theoretically select in order to hide with. So an outside observer wouldn't know whether the red one or the blue ones are actually being spent because they all appear to be. So putting that into how it actually looks in the ring signature, you start off with your red input, you take all the other blue inputs, and again, an outside observer would not know that the red one is actually being spent. It would make it seem as all of these are being spent. So an observer would not know which one is actually being spent. Even the receiver in the transaction doesn't know what the origin of the money is. They just know that it was valid and they can accept it. In this example, I used a ring size of 6, so you used 6 total inputs, so 5 others. Currently on the Monero network, you need to use at least 3 inputs, so at least 2 others, or else it is rejected from the network entirely. It won't process the transaction. So as you can see, all transactions have to have this certain level of privacy where they must include some other people's inputs. Later this year in September, there is a hard fork. There are discussions to increase this further because it's better to hide among more inputs than less inputs. It was previously agreed upon to be 5 several years ago, but with some efficiency improvements, it may be improved to a number, I think the most likely is probably 10 total inputs, because obviously if you hide with more, it's just better for your privacy. One question we always get is, if you can make it appear as if you're spending other people's money, what actually prevents you from spending other people's money? Because that would really suck. And that's where the key image comes in. The key image is like a hash of the red output there that you do control. So if you choose any of the other blue ones or change them, you'll still have the same key image. And nodes and miners just check for 2 things when you send the transaction. They check to make sure that they haven't received the same key image before, so you're not trying to double spend. And they also check to make sure that it's actually valid, so you're not throwing some random string at the network and hoping they'll take it, because it won't. So that's how the ring signature looked going up until January. In January, there was an improvement onto this, because currently you could see the value of these inputs. You would know that the red one was maybe 10 Monero. You might know that the first one is 5 Monero. And that's not good, because you can trace the amounts of money that people are transacting. If someone sends a certain inputs from one account to another account to the third account in short succession, it might be very likely that you can assume that that's where the money went from one account to the next. And that's not a good thing. So instead, Monero decided to hide the transaction amounts with an improvement to confidential transactions. So instead of using all of the inputs, like was previously used, instead you cryptographically commit to using only a certain proportion of the value of the inputs, but only you know what that proportion is. So you can see here as an example, a lot of extra information showed up here, you can see that it used about half. Here you use about half of each of these. I exported it as a PDF, so I apologize for the formatting. It didn't work with PowerPoint earlier. And so you commit to only paying about half. And the formula that goes into that, I'm not going to explain it too much into detail because it's too complicated for such a short talk. But it really consists of two parts. On the upper right-hand corner, you have the actual amount A. So if you're sending 10 Monero to someone, it would be this A value. You want to hide this from the rest of the network. So you also add a random number to it, which is the X there. So you will publish, when you make the transaction, you will publish the RCT value for both the series of inputs and outputs, so people know that you're using the proper amount of funds, but people no longer know how much is actually being spent because they're getting a different value than what you're actually spending. So you take all of that information, you start with your input, you combine it with all the others, you take a cryptographic commit of the inputs, and then you end up with the ring CT ring signature that throws it all together, and then finally you have an unknown amount of Monero that is being sent to someone, and we'll get where it's going to later on in the presentation. As an output on the right-hand side, lower right-hand side, I'm going to kind of ignore this, but this is the commitment public key. This is what you use to tell the network that the math you're doing for ring CT is appropriate. They use this to verify whether you're actually abiding by the rules or not, and to see if there's a problem. So that's just how inputs work for an individual transaction. But it's important to also know how inputs are used throughout the history of the blockchain. On the left, I have the same inputs as before. Again, the one you have in red is highlighted. And on the right-hand side, there is a theoretical blockchain with each of those blocks there. And in red are the blocks that your input appeared in some way. There are really three ways that your input can appear in the blockchain. The first is if it's new money. If it's a coin-based transaction, it will appear in the blockchain. There's no reason to hide new money among old money because you would always know the new money is the new money, right? So there's no reason to hide that. Oh, sorry. I'm used to animations. My apologies. So first, the coin-based transaction could be new money. Second could be if you have control over this input and you spend it, it will show up in the blockchain. But finally, someone else could borrow your input to appear to spend in their transaction. So since you don't know a way of differentiating between someone actually spending and someone else borrowing an input to spend it, you don't actually know, despite it showing up 3 times here, whether it was spent 3 times or none of these times. You don't know as an outside observer, and that's the point, for you not to be able to know when people actually spend their money. So how are the inputs selected? This is probably the hardest part of Monero because you need to choose the other inputs convincingly to make it appear as if they could be a reasonable one for someone to spend. If one of the inputs is a day old and the rest are all 9 months old, those are probably the one that's a day old, that's the one that's actually being spent. So it's important to choose ones appropriately. When Monero first launched, it chose inputs based off a pure random distribution, which might sound good, where old ones and new ones have the same chance of being chosen. But since people spend money they receive, are much more likely to spend money they've recently received than money they've had in their wallet for a while, this is not good at all. So Monero instead uses a what I call an improved triangular distribution, where the majority of the inputs that are selected are within the past 1.8 days. So you can see Monero has been around for about 3 years, and it selects majority from the past 1.8 days. So you can see there's a clear emphasis on choosing newer inputs. However, as people change how they spend their Monero will have to continually change how it selects the inputs in order to make them always convincing. And that will be a struggle that Monero will have to always deal with, but something that we have been looking at for some time now. Yes?
Sorry, why do you say Monero is the one selecting the input?
Yes. So you can select whatever other inputs you want. However, it is important in the wallet software to make it convincing. So it's important that the official wallets that are provided, which are currently used by everyone except possibly Monero, that those use a convincing input selection. It is possible to have a more restrictive network like protocol level requirement, but currently we're fine at the moment with communicating with the wallet providers to choose inputs appropriately. If that becomes a problem in the future, it may need to become a protocol restraint in some way. And you would know that because you know the age of inputs. You can just say, hey, the wallet needs to provide X number from the past few days or else it rejects it. So in that way, it could be possible. So I talked so far about how Monero obfuscates information on the blockchain, but it's also important to remember that you leak information trying to get your transaction onto the blockchain. When you are going to make a transaction, you need to tell the rest of the network that you would like this transaction to actually be included in the next block. And suppose that you're running a full node, you're the little green one over there, the origin node, and you're making a transaction. And you need to push this out to the rest of the network. Some of the other nodes that you might be connected to might be logging the IP address that they get these requests from. So they don't know anything about the transaction, but they can try and guess that this transaction is associated with your IP address. So, for instance, someone could, theoretically, come knock on your door and say, hey, we think you made this transaction. Please give us the private key, or maybe not so nicely, give us the private key, so that we can know more information about what is being sent. And that is not a good thing. This is an issue with every cryptocurrency that is currently available, that you leak information with how you connect to the network. And so it's important to allow users another option. See, in this case, the logging nodes would get the actual IP address of the origin node, and that puts them at risk. And that puts them at risk. Furthermore, you don't know which nodes are logging, so you can't just purposely avoid them or anything. So you don't know who these attackers are. So your only real option is to hide the information that is actually going to these nodes. And Monero is working on a project called Kavri as a side project that would hide the transaction broadcast in I2P. Can I see a quick show of hands? How many people have heard of I2P before? And I'm guessing it's probably not too many. Okay, that's about normal, actually. We're like 3 people know. How many people have heard of Tor before? Okay, again, the majority, so that's also normal. I2P is similar to Tor, not from a technical perspective, but it is similar in Tor to that it is it's an additional layer of the internet that you can use as a decentralized system in order to exchange information. We're using I2P for several reasons that I can talk more in depth after the presentation if you'd like, but it's similar to Tor in that I2P can be used so that the participants on the network can hide like what they're doing and so forth. So that your wallet will connect to the other nodes with I2P, and in this instance, the nodes would no longer know where the transaction broadcast came from because it would be tunneled through I2P instead of just the normal ClearNet. So as an example here, instead of them getting your actual IP address, they get a meaningless and disposable I2P address. So you can't prevent the nodes from logging information. You just have to give them information that's completely useless. So hopefully they don't log it anymore, but even if they do, it doesn't matter anymore because it doesn't mean anything. Kavri currently does not work like this with Monero. It's currently technically in a pre-alpha phase. You can download some binaries for it and connect to the I2P network and mess around a little bit there, but there is no integration, as I've kind of discussed, with Monero yet. That's still at least a year out. The cool thing about Kavri 2, though, is it doesn't only work with Monero. It can work with pretty much any other cryptocurrency. The best example I have is with Dash. It's a cryptocurrency where the master nodes require collateral locked up. in order to operate one. Imagine if you knew your neighbor had 100 masternodes with hundreds of thousands of euros locked up. They're probably going to be the target of crime. So it's important for them to at least have the option to hide their IP address from other users in order to protect not just the privacy, but the safety of the person running these master nodes, or in Monero, the nodes too. Monero, Kavri will also have the option where it can hide all of the information through I2P. So if you have like a bad internet service provider or something, they wouldn't even know that you're using Monero. They would just know that you're using I2P, but they wouldn't know what you're using it for. So that's also an additional layer for towards censorship resistance, and why it's also important. On to the last part where Monero hides where the money is going to. Instead of sending the money directly to an address like you do with Bitcoin, where you directly send it to an address, instead you basically make these containers of outputs. And these outputs contain Monero. Again, people don't know how much is in there, but they can only be unlocked so that someone can use it by the private key of the person you're sending it to. And so I'm not going to get into the cryptography behind it, but the idea is you put money in this container such that only the person you're sending it to can open it, and no one else knows who this money is actually allocated to. So it's like it's one-way math here. So you can see on the right-hand side, or I guess more in the middle, it looks you have several strings. These are the different outputs, and they will never appear on the blockchain again. They're just one-time use. And you don't even know that these are all going to the same person. So for instance, here in this example, the red ones are going to the receiver, but the blue ones are coming right back to the sender, the person who originally made the transaction. And this is used often for breaking up large inputs. Suppose you have 100 Monero and you only want to send 10 to someone, you can send 90 back to yourself as change. That's how Monero deals with that problem. But as you can see here, that instead of people no longer know where the money is going to, because it's not actually sent to an address. So in summary, Monero takes your input, hides it among several others, so it has an ambiguous input, commits an unknown value to an outside observer to send an unknown amount of Monero to someone else, and then finally that goes to an output that no one else knows where it's going to. So out of all of the information that is stored on the blockchain, as you can see here, all of it is obfuscated. And it's not something, it's not something that someone can optionally use. This is something that's the case for all of the transactions that happen with Monero currently. There is no way to send one that does not go through these privacy features. And one thing we're really particularly proud of in the Monero community is that all the transactions are private, because we feel that privacy needs to be mandatory, or else it doesn't really matter because no one will use it, and people won't have enough people to hide among. So on the left-hand side there, you can see some of the history of how Monero used to be used before using other inputs in the ring signature was mandatory. Only 1/3 of transactions actually used any other inputs to hide with. For 2/3 of the transactions, about a year and a half ago and earlier, people always knew what the origin of the funds were. And that was a major problem for two reasons. One, obviously that one transaction isn't as private as it could be, and if someone does that by accident, that really sucks because it's stored on the blockchain for everyone to see forever. And two, the strength of the Monero network is caused by people borrowing each other's inputs. If no one ever borrows your input, it's not convincing to say, hey, maybe I didn't spend this, maybe someone else borrowed it, if that's actually not the case of what's happening on the network. So it's really important for people in Monero to be borrowing each other's inputs. So Monero made it mandatory that all transactions had to borrow other inputs. On the right-hand side there, you have another cryptocurrency that claims to offer better untraceability than Monero. But only the red proportion there is money that is actually held privately in the coin. The green proportion is just as transparent as Bitcoin, and people know how much are in those addresses. So you have the same problems with Bitcoin, where if you're making a transaction, people know how much is in those accounts and how you're spending for the history of time, because it's stored in a public blockchain. So it needs to be mandatory for people to really care, or for you to get real advantages out of it, or else people will just opt out. And that's not good. And they might even do that unintentionally because their wallet provider might not give them an option. Moving on just to a brief history of Monero, I won't cover all of these points, but it was launched in April 2014 by someone named Thankful for Today on Bitcoin Talk. This person is currently not involved in the project anymore because he proposed some very controversial changes, and the Monero core team forked the project away from him only several days later. In September 2014, the network was actually attacked by a very capable attacker who spammed the network with a lot of transactions for several days and forced a hard fork. To our knowledge, nobody lost funds because of this, but it really was a turning point in Monero's history where you had this team that inherited code, they didn't really know it was in it, and they understood, especially at this point, that they really needed to understand the code that they had, and also that the pillars of privacy and security are things that really need to be focused on, and not some feature that you can talk about as something that's nice to have or just only casually refer to. So not too much, really to show for it at least, happened between 2014 and 2016, but there was a lot of background work that was happening. There were several research papers published by the Monero Research Lab that discussed how Monero could improve the privacy and security of the network. Monero switched to a different database system, so it no longer needs to store the entire blockchain in RAM, which obviously would not be sustainable for any normal computer, or especially phones. And finally, in March 2014, Monero took the important step to make all transactions private by mandate on the network, or else they would be completely rejected. So since then, all transactions have hid the sender with Monero. In December 2016, Monero took the important first step of making Monero easier to use. Because until this point, we told everyone who wanted to learn how to use Monero, or at least wanted to use Monero, that they had to use the command line, or they could use some web wallet. And that kind of sucked for most people. So this December release of the first graphical user interface was a very important and symbolic first step for Monero being easier to use. In 2017, in January, the improvement Ring CT that I discussed was enabled on the network, and now we've seen over 99.95% use of this currently default but optional feature. It will become mandatory in September. And just a few more things to add on there. There was a critical flaw that Monero patched in February that was not exploited, luckily, but we could have retroactively seen if it was exploited, and it was not. And in April of this year, there was another hard fork in order to make some improvements to the dynamic block size and dynamic fees. So this is how the GUI currently looks. There was a lot of time that went into this. This is what's available for desktop, and it is currently in the process of being ported to Android and iOS. There is currently an unofficial APK that you can download that one of the developers has compiled, so you can play with that, but expect all of your money to magically disappear if you try to use it for any meaningful amount of money. This My Monero lightweight wallet is the next important step for making Monero easier for people to use. Because right now with Monero, we encourage everyone who uses it to run a full node. And we understand that going forward, as less developers become interested in the project and people who care less about technology in general, and more so are interested in finance or some other aspects, that they might not want to run a full node for any number of reasons, or might not know how, or something else. So lightweight wallets allow you to easily use someone else's node in order to still have an efficient way to transact with this other person's node. And that's the My Monero wallet, I've been telling people for months, has been close to completion, but once it finally releases, it will work across platforms, so desktop, Android, and iOS. So that's kind of, look for that, I guess at this point, hopefully by the end of the year. It'll come when it comes, I suppose. But it's open source, so you can check the progress. So for a system where everything is always private, how do you have any transparency if you want to for instance, prove that you sent someone money. Like, that's an important thing to be able to do on a network. If you send money to Amazon, they claim, hey, we never got it. You need some way to prove that you actually sent it, for instance. And you can kind of do this through the view key. I'm not going to get into the cryptography about how Monero has this view key, but with this view key, you can, it's just a key, it's like a hash, that you can give to someone in order to view the incoming information of a single transaction or of all of the transactions that go into this account. You can give this to selected parties, so you can either just give this to your best friend, or you can put it on your website for everyone to see. That is your choice. And the most common use for this that we can think of, at least, are for charities. So, for instance, on the official Monero website, there is a Monero donation link, and with that, there's also the provided view key for it. So people can have some means of auditing the Monero donation address, so you can check how much money is coming into the account. And also, finally, for parents, if they want to make accounts for their children and still have some level of controller access to them, they could have the view key, but still not have, so they can see what's some of what's happening, but they don't have the ability to actually spend the funds. So this is also useful for auditors, for instance, so they can't actually spend the money. So there are some limitations for Monero. The first one in the center is that it is not based on Bitcoin. Almost every coin in the space is forked from Bitcoin, or one of another project that was forked from Bitcoin, but instead Monero is based on something called crypto note. So any improvements that have been done with Bitcoin that Monero wants to implement need to be rebuilt from scratch. An example of this was confidential transactions for Bitcoin that Monero wanted, so they had to rebuild it as ring confidential transactions to work with Monero. They couldn't just take confidential transactions as it worked with Bitcoin. So that means that it takes a lot more work for developers to incorporate Monero into their platforms. And as such, no hardware wallet currently supports Monero. Ledger is at this point several white papers into how they can incorporate Monero, and they're currently working on it, but they still don't have support yet, and it's been a much longer process than it would be to implement a Bitcoin-based coin. And then also on the right, we don't have a mobile wallet that looks like that yet, but we're so close, almost. That's what I'm really looking forward to in the next few months. And there are several people working on that, including Koinomi, MyMonero, and the official GUI port. And then Jax also claimed they would like to add it again, but we have no idea what their progress is. So I want to talk about some ongoing development with Monero 2. So one important thing is multi-sig. That stands for multi-signatures. I'm not getting into the cryptography of it, but when you want to spend Monero to buy something from a merchant, it's ideal for there to be a contingency in place so that the merchant doesn't just take your money and never give you what you want that you actually ordered, and they just say, sucks to be you, I already have it in my account, nothing you can do about it. So multi-sig will allow you to essentially throw an arbitrator in between so that you can have this arbitrator either process or reverse, in a sense, or I suppose more accurately, cancel the transaction if certain terms are not met. And that's something that is about, like, one of the multi-sig methods has been completed and needs peer review, and the other one still needs certain development. Sub-addresses. So right now, your Monero address, and I suppose for the history of Monero, your wallet address never appears on the blockchain itself. But if you post your Monero address on your Facebook and you also publish it under your super underground DJ career website, you're going to make an association between the two. Right now, you can get around this by using 2 Monero accounts, but sub-addresses will allow you to have one master account and then basically 2 different accounts that point to the one, but there's no connection between the two. So you can keep your OPSEC more separated in an easier way. The work for this has mostly been done, and we expect it to be in the September hard fork. Also important are translations. The Monero community has worked really hard to get the official wallet software updated to several different languages. There is still plenty of work to be done, though. And especially with documentation, there needs to be a lot of work. If you go to the Monero website is currently only in English. If you tried to look for a talk about how ring-CT worked, or basically what I'm doing right now, it's pretty much only in English. There are very small communities at the moment working on getting Chinese and Russian, some basic documents ready, but there still needs to be a lot of work that goes into this. The Monero website recently got a redesign, so you can check that out if you want to see a super fancy new website. But now that the website has been redone, there needs to be a lot of work to update it with the new translations also. Moving on to the lower right, left-hand side, lightweight wallets. I already talked about this earlier, but it'll allow people to use Monero without running a full node in a much easier and better way for the network. In the center, ring-CT optimizations. Monero transactions are currently much larger than Bitcoin transactions, and they will continue to be much larger. But optimizations to ring-CT, specifically with the range proof, which I know I didn't talk about, but optimizations to ring-CT could reduce the size of the transactions by about half to make on-chain scaling easier. But of course, this has not quite been done yet, and it most likely will not be in the September hard fork. And then finally, on the lower right-hand side, this is something that I am specifically focusing on, more so outside of development, but just in the community in general. I think it's really important to also have community outreach and try to have better education about Monero, because most people may have heard of Monero before, at least if you're in the Bitcoin space already, but they don't really know how Monero works or what differentiates it with any of the other coins that claim to do the same thing. So I'm currently working really hard in order to have better resources for the community and encouraging people to talk about Monero at a local level. And so now we have bi-weekly community meetings where people can discuss these type of things. So moving on to the hard fork schedule, Monero will have 3 this year. Typically there's 2, but the one in April was added earlier this year, I suppose. For the September hard fork that's coming up, you can think of it as like a privacy update mostly. So with that comes mandatory ring-CT, so everyone will have to use it from now on. It will increase the minimum ring size to at least 5, although as I've stated, it likely will be a large number. My guess at this point is 10. And then other things like Fluffy Blocks, which is a crazy name based off Ricardo Fluffy Pony Spagni, who's involved in the project. Basically all it means is that the nodes have lower bandwidth requirements. That's what that means. Also, an improved input selection algorithm. I imagine you'll continuously see research into this from now on because it's very important with Monero. It will bring 0MQ, which is a developer library that Jeremy talked about a little bit earlier. And then finally, the sub-addresses for people to be able to use. One thing that is really important to me, especially as not a big developer and more so a community member, is just such a large community growth over the past 2 years, and I suppose since inception. So Monero has been growing substantially in the community of people who are active in the project on both the developer and a non-development level. So this is just on the subreddit. You can see the number of subscribers, and you can see it's kind of had pretty sustained and constant growth, and it's even accelerating at this point. So that's really fun to see, is that unlike the past where it would usually be me or like a core team member answering questions on Reddit, it's now someone else that has spent a lot of time to learn about it now, and by the time I go to answer the question, like 12 other people already have. So that's really fun for me to see as the one who normally was the one answering a lot of these questions. Also, you can see based off the commits per month, the amount of work by the amount of contributors that have gone into it, that Monero has seen an increasing amount of development, and it really just shows that there are a lot of people interested in making the project better in many different ways. Okay. One last slide that I added specifically for today, just about XMR.TO. This is, as was shown earlier, an easy way to pay Bitcoin addresses with Monero, because there are maybe like 5 merchants that really accept Monero directly, but XMR.TO makes it really easy for you to pay Bitcoin addresses while still maintaining the privacy I talked about with Monero. So as long as you connect to XMR.TO with Tor, then you have basically the best type of privacy of Monero in addition to the network effect of Bitcoin. So it's really the best of both worlds. And for the next year or two, as people are still learning about Monero, I anticipate that most new users will use Monero as basically a mixer for Bitcoin. They'll take their Bitcoin, convert it to Monero, maybe send it around a few times within Monero, and then pay a Bitcoin address. So that's kind of how I anticipate people using it in the future. And this is just one easy way, including Shapeshift and maybe other exchanges if you want to use them. But this one is one that makes it easier to also maintain your privacy. So that's it from me. So thank you for coming out. Again, we had an excellent turnout today. If you're interested, I highly encourage you to go to the official website, getmonero.org. We have a very large Reddit community on Monero. There's a very good technical community on Stack Exchange, where if you want to know the specific way that ring signatures work or something, that would be the place to look it up. And then finally, if you need to contact me for some reason, I'm not sure why, that's my email address there in case you need to get in touch with me. But typically, you can just search Justin Monero, and I'll show up somewhere. So that's it for me for the presentation. Thank you again. Do you think it would be good to do some questions, or just go right to the pizza?
You can maybe do a short break while the pizza warm, and then we'll come back for questions.
Okay, perfect. So go have pizza. Thank you for listening. I know you all want pizza, and I do too.
Just one thing. We ordered pizza late the second time, so we can have pizza now. Some question and
wow.
new pizza after. So don't be afraid to what you want.
If that's not an incentive to stay, I don't know what one is.